Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Developing Teams Using the TKI Team Report. My name is Caitlin, and I'm a marketing manager here at the Myers-Briggs company. So before we get started today, I would just like to run through a couple of things. So this webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending out the webinar and a copy of the slides along with any resources that are mentioned in the next couple of days. We would like to use the questions box throughout this webinar. So anytime you have questions, please feel free to submit them as we are going through content. But also we will be using the questions box a little bit like a chat box. So we want to hear from you, know what you're thinking, what your thoughts are about things that are being discussed. So please also submit anything that you'd like to share with us in the questions box as well. And now I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Gail. Gail is the co-author of the newly released TKI Team Report, and she works with teams and conflict management at all levels. She has over 20 years of experience working with teams, and this includes international companies and organizations. And she specializes in communication, building collaborative capacity, conflict management, and team development. So I will go ahead and hand it over to you, Gail.
Okay. Thank you, Caitlin, and welcome everyone who's here today online with us. I think some of you probably attended webinar 1, and I'm glad to have you back, and probably some of you did not, so this will be the first time. So I'll try to, hit the bases for everyone who might be here. And so I can learn a little bit more about you. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off, and I'm going to have Caitlin launch a poll for us. So the first one here is about your experience with the TKI assessment tool, just kind of getting a sense of how many people have either A, used the TKI predominantly with individuals or maybe dyads. 2 people, B, maybe you've used it with individuals and teams, so that and teams is a separate part. And then C, infrequently, or D, you've never used it before. So if you could answer that question, so we can kind of get a sense of how much experience people have with the TKI. That will really help me as we go forward. I can see the numbers coming through. And it looks like most people have used it with individuals and teams. And then obviously, and then the next, of course, just with individuals, some infrequently, and just a few people have never used it before. Okay, great. Okay, and then next, what I'd like to do is look at how much experience you have facilitating teams. And it doesn't necessarily have to be with the TKI. So again, I just want to kind of get some experience. So A, you have a great deal of experience. I know that's a little subjective, but you feel like you've got a great deal of experience facilitating teams, maybe just some experience, or you don't have any experience at all. Okay. I love it. Okay, good. So we've got quite a few people who have a great deal of experience. We have around 35% who are saying that they have some experience, and a few people who have no experience. So great. And I'm really hoping, as Caitlin mentioned before, to use the question box as almost like a chat box. This platform isn't particularly interactive, so the more I hear from you, the more I'll kind of know what you're thinking. And then as we finish this up, we'll go through and look at all those comments and see what additional kinds of things I maybe need to add or think about, or we'll get back to you, or those types of things. So more is better, putting things in the discussion box. We really appreciate that. Okay, and particularly those of you who have a lot of experience, if you want to dump ideas in, if things, how you're using it, or suggestions you have, that would be great too. So really love to hear from people. Okay, now let's see. So I'm going to cover 3 things today. One is just some conflict basics for teams, because this is introducing the team report, a little bit how it's different. And I know some of you, if you're doing teams and maybe TKI, you've probably been doing like I've been doing, is using the individual instrument and then just, painstakingly entering all that information and doing whatever spreadsheets and those kinds of things, and creating my own graphics. So some of you will have experience with teams and TKI, as you said earlier. And then the bulk of my time today is going to be on steps for designing the TKI workshop. So basically, if some of you have looked at the facilitator's guide, the first webinar covered some of the information and the first part of the facilitator's guide. This webinar is primarily covering the part that's how to do a workshop. I'm going to talk about a kind of a 3-day half-hour workshop, but obviously there are many variations on that theme. And then the last part, we'll save some time for questions and answers so that we can have some interaction that way too. Okay. So, the next question I want to ask is, given what I just gave you is kind of the scope of today's talk, what are you hoping to get out of today's webinar, or what do you hope to learn? So that would actually help me, and I'm looking at the question box if anybody wants to throw something in the question box and kind of tell me what you're thinking about. So anybody have anything? There we go. Okay. Okay, good. Okay. Additional tools and techniques. We're going to cover that. Conflict awareness and resolution on ELTs. Okay, good. Anybody else? So I'll try to, we will hit some of those. If there are things that we don't hit after the workshop, we can, I can get back to you with some things. So whether to replace the, oh yeah, I've got that one for sure. Insight into using the team report. I'm kind of reading out loud what I'm seeing. Examples of practical application. Okay, great. Those are good. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Okay, I'm going to keep moving, but if you've got more things, go ahead and drop those in there. Okay, so just quickly, I want to talk a little bit about teams and conflict management. I know most of you are all experienced with the definition of conflict, which we all know is neutral. Doesn't necessarily mean we're fighting with each other. It's a choice. It's it's really how you handle conflict that really makes the difference. And as we all know from the research and from our own experience, that if you manage conflict well, it's a very good chance you can improve innovation, increase engagement. The list goes on and on and on. Of course, many of you know that already. But then poorly managed team conflict can decrease morale. It can create delays. Lots of that list is long too. So, and I'm guessing we've either been on these kind of teams before, each one of these, or we're helping to coach or to facilitate teams. Okay, so the 5 conflict handling modes that you're all, probably almost everybody's familiar with. There's a few people who weren't familiar with TKI. We have on the one side assertiveness, on the other side cooperativeness, and how this is different from those of you that have been using the individual TKI is that we now want to really start thinking about teams. And as I talk about that, I want to mention briefly, because I know this question came up, about the difference between the individual TKI and the team TKI. So they are 2 different reports. If you go to the Myers-Briggs website and look at the product page, you'll still see the familiar individual report, and now there is a team report. The individual report you want to still use as you have always done with individuals or dyads, and it's the 30 questions, A/B choices, that way. And I use it in the classroom, or I use it with corporate training, things like that. But the team one is going to be separate. It still has the 30 A/B questions, but now the report is, and you're going to see some examples today. You would have seen some of you were in the first webinar on how we do a team profile to show you the team, and then team recommendations based on your high and low modes. So it's really different that way. For some of you, you might want to look at inside teams. I do that kind of work where I'm doing intra-team work and using the TKI for that. Also, it can be how is the team working with other teams, so inter-team kind of work you can be doing using this. And then I'm actually leaving for Africa on Thursday this week and going to work with 5 nations around building collaborative capacity. So there are all, and I'll mention a little bit today, of lots of spin-offs that you can use from thinking about conflict and collaboration, compromising, etc., for different kinds of teams. And probably a lot of you have different kinds of experiences doing that. And if you do and want to share those in the question box, that would be great too. Okay, so remember the modes again are, it's when you use them, they're situational. So I worked with a team yesterday, actually used the TKI report with a team yesterday. And one of the things we always remember is while they may have a profile that looks like it's pretty useful, not a lot of really, overuse or underuse, it's also really important about when they're using things. So that might be, really important. And I'll give you an example. I was working with a team, an international team, and they do international development work. And so the profiles of the group I was working with didn't look extreme in many ways, but what I noticed was the work that they do, which was to work with other nations in a collaborative fashion. There were very few people who had strong skills in collaboration. And when we dug in to kind of figure that out, what we realized that there was kind of a culture in the organization for more accommodating and maybe compromising, and not like a culture and value around collaborating, and definitely not a strong skill set that was developed through training or whatever other ways they might do that. So the when becomes just as important as to what the modes are. So being able to talk with groups about that. Of course, this work in teams, I'm really delving into what's going on in the organization. What are the organization's goals? And then, as we know from the research and practical experience, conflict management is key to all of those, objectives that people might have, and being able to do that well. So that's ways that I use it, and I find it extremely helpful. One thing I want to mention before I go on to probably most of you know is this instrument, the team report, just like the one for individual, we want to make sure we're using it for development purposes and not for recruiting, promotion, selection, those types of things. So that is, that's important. But also being able to work with all kinds of outside, not just like I said, inside the team, but maybe it's the team. How are they working together with customers, with vendors? I recently worked with a team that had a US office and had an office in Taiwan. And so we were looking at what were the different cultures of those two teams. They were asking questions about how they could work better together when they came together, and then how they can work separately. So some people are interested in larger groups. Can you have subgroups and talk about that, as well as how the whole team work together as a group, and what might be the culture of the organization around conflict management and how to address that, okay? So let's see. Next, this is the main part of what I'm gonna talk about today, is the 3 steps. So in the facilitator's guide, I have in there, Ralph and I worked on this as well as Ken, and I put in there a 3-hour or kind of a half-day workshop that you could use. So again, those of you who have a lot of experience, I'm sure you've got many variations that you're using for this, as well as those of you who may not have much experience, you could use this as kind of a jumping off point. The other thing that I've done before, so I've done everything from a 1-hour workshop on this to, which I don't recommend necessarily, because especially if you want to do action-oriented kinds of things, which I usually do, you want to do something longer. I do half day, I do full day. Sometimes I do full week with a partner. We do around leadership around this. And then we will tie it with maybe the EQI, the MBTI, the 5OB. So depending on what we find out that the organization needs, doing a needs assessment, we may pair it with sessions on how to give and receive feedback, on negotiations. There could be a number of different things based on what's core to what we find out in the beginning, and how conflict plays a role, and what are the other pieces that we can work with it. So the 3 main things I'm going to talk about are the 3 steps: planning, delivery, and post-workshop. So I'm going to kind of cover those a little bit and work through them quickly. Remember, all of this is in the facilitator's guide. So if you haven't seen it yet, you can go back and get a lot of details. I'm going to kind of skim the wave tops today, but you'll have lots of information. And then this webinar is going to be posted so you can hear it again. And then also webinar 1 is posted on the website too. So for planning. So the first thing I do, and I'm sure many of you have done this before, is meet with a client or leader to learn the purpose of it. So doing a needs assessment. So again, depending on how deep the organization wants to go, the one I did that was a short one, I spent maybe an hour or so with the leader ahead of time just to find out what were her goals, why were they asking me in, what are some issues they thought they might be having, so I get some context. And if you look at the facilitator's guide, and I can see someone asking, where's the facilitator's guide? That is on the website, Myers-Briggs website. And if you go to the shop and where the TKI report is, you'll see, get to the product page, and you'll see the facilitator's guide there. So that is free. You can download that, and tons of information. I tried to put a lot of tools in there. And again, based on what we're hearing from all of you as we go forward, tools that we might add will be really helpful if you give us information about that. Okay, so these are just a few samples. Are there clear goals, deadlines, or deliverables for leadership? You know, something I did recently was for a whole department, and we were going to do it for the whole organization. So we talked to the senior leaders, and they had specific goals about where they wanted this organization to go and what they thought some of the issues were. And then we talked to the senior leaders across the departments. And so we really needed to get a sense of what were the goals, where were they hoping to go, and then how did this piece on conflict management play in that. I might want to know a little bit about the history of the team. How long has this team been working together, or this group? How those of you who do a lot of this work know it's really important to understand the interdependency. How much do people rely on each other? And the more they rely on each other, the more they interact, the more, you know, we normally call them a team, and the more opportunities there may be for conflict in there, which would be differences, right? And if you think about organizations today, you often see, you know, the purposeful development of teams or creating of teams with diversity. So while that can be great, if it's not managed up front well, those, again, of you who've done a lot of this work, it's difficult if you haven't done that. And I saw a little note, I'm not tracking everything, but I saw something about trust. So obviously that's a piece of it. So I might want to know something about that. You know, is there an issue with trust, you know, with this team? And maybe a little bit of what's going on about that. That happened in the last organization I worked with. And so it was important to understand that. Some of you probably know, working with the TKI, that if there's stress and mistrust, that's also an issue that's related. So to me, really understanding the context around this is hugely important. And again, it depends on how long of a thing you're going to do. So again, sometimes I've done an hour with a pre and a post to follow up. I've done half day, and I've done some things that may last, you know, 3 months, 6 months, because you're coming back and doing additional coaching or those types of things. Second, I'm going to keep moving on here. So administering the assessments after you kind of get the needs assessment, and I'll briefly show you the modified instructions versus standard instructions. I've created a team diagnostic tool based on some work I did with some colleagues, a large research project we did on teams. So I modified that for this. That's available in the facilitator's guide. Then you want to generate reports and do your own kind of analysis of the results based on your initial meeting that you've had and the data that you get. What do you anticipate might be some of the issues and things that you want to be prepared for? Create a workshop agenda. The agenda, a suggested one, is in the facilitator's guide for this 3-hour that I'm talking about right now. But obviously, depending on what you're doing with the team and what the goals are, you are going to want to adjust that to fit those needs. And then making sure you gather your materials and resources. Again, I've just hit the bullets here, but there's a lot more information in the facilitator's guide. Okay. Next are the instructions. So again, just briefly, There are a couple of pages in the facilitator's guide that talk about this in much more detail. It's also an Elevate. So you can either use the standard instructions. Remember, it's consider situations in which you find yourself. So it's very general. How do you respond to others in such a situation? So that just is how do you generally approach when your wishes differ from another's. You can also do what we call the modified instructions, and those are for the focal team only. So you might want to, and again, there are instructions for that in the facilitator's guide, and also on Elevate, you'll get some instructions. So for instance, and we used this one yesterday, actually, something like this. Inside your, whatever your project team name is, how do you usually respond when you find your wishes differing from those of the team members in that team? So you're going to have instructions, and you want to know how do they handle conflict within that focal team. And you might even want to include all the people's names in there to make sure you've got, the right people. Everyone's talking about the same people. My experience is not everybody knows who are members of a team. It's always interesting. Okay, and then quickly, this is the team diagnostic. Remember, this is optional. This is not a required. It is a reproducible master in the back of the facilitator guide. I used this yesterday. I find this extremely helpful, and it's just a supplement to, once you know the profiles of the team, it gives me some information of not just from the leader, but from all the team members. How do they feel about the importance of their goal? Is their team experiencing a great deal of stress? And I make sure this is all anonymous. I do report back the means and the standard deviations. So, and you can do bar charts or whatever with that you like. So people can see, and I'll generally sort them on which ones are the strongest and which are the weakest, and then look at where there's maybe a lot of distribution, like a lot of disagreement that people might have about particular questions that are in here. And to me, this paired with the profile is extremely helpful. Now, one quick example for this would not be appropriate to use for a new team, right? You can tell by the questions looking at it that you have to know something about the team goals and the team members in order to answer this. So for a new team, you wouldn't want to use this. And same thing on the modified instructions. You wouldn't use those instructions if it's brand new team, because they're not going to have enough experience with each other to be able to answer that. Okay, again, this is in the facilitator's guide and one of the extra tools. And then this is just a quick, we're not going to go through this. This is the sample agenda for the half day, and kind of gives you some approximate times and some ideas about what you might do, and then great detail through many more pages. The facilitator's guide is about 46 pages long, I think. So it's got lots of materials, lots of tools, lots of instructions for whether you're new or just to get some ideas, even if you've been doing this for a while. So we're going to act as if we are, doing the workshop. So one of the first things you want to have is some learning objectives. So in the facilitator's guide, I've dropped in a few example learning objectives, but obviously it's really going to depend on what you find out from the initial interview with the leader or with the senior leader. And so you'll want to adjust these learning objectives. So the one I did yesterday, I had a variation on a theme of this. It wasn't exactly this, it was something else, because the leader had something else in mind. Next is setting some ground rules. Again, what I generally do, whether it's a new team or whether it is maybe a struggling team that's derailed a little bit, and sometimes I call these team standards, and I work with the team, and this is just an example, this is also in the facilitator's guide, but we sit down and we talk about how is it we want to interact with each other. So the person that asked about trust, sometimes this is a helpful tool. I've worked with executive teams who kind of derailed, and generally what's happened there is a lot of mistrust. If I'm working with the executive team, we probably would have interviewed all the people on the team, so we really know what some of the issues are. And so one of the things we want to do is make sure we set some ground rules at how we're going to interact with each other. And so that is extremely helpful. We pair that with, talking about my colleague and I, we pair that with how to give and receive feedback. And what we find with some teams, they actually use this as their touchstone. So every time they come in to work together, maybe they've got it posted on the wall, and they develop this. This isn't us, we facilitate it, but they develop it, and then they learn to give and receive feedback around these standards. So this is the way we kind of agree. We actually make people raise their hand and agree to everything here. And then we teach giving and receiving feedback to make sure that people do this. So it might mean how to shift a norm on a team. You know, they have somehow gotten in a bad place with their norms, and we're trying to shift their norms on how they can work together as a team. So that has been extremely helpful. I've done it many, many times with teams. New teams, it's a great way to get things kicked off the ground, kind of set expectations for how we're going to behave with one another. It's really good for inclusion and diversity. That's another way to do it. Making sure everybody is working together. So a team I worked with, I had new team members and experienced team members. We wanted to make sure there was a ground rule that everybody participated, because oftentimes what happens is the more experienced people do all the talking, the new people don't do much talking, and that's an issue. For MBTI people, right? We know that a lot of times the I's are not going to sometimes jump in the conversation. So can we figure out ways to make sure that everyone's aware and making sure everyone's included and we're getting ideas? And then I use a lot of other process tools to make sure that there's a lot of inclusion. Okay, so I'm not going to repeat this because we just talked about this, but this is the idea of the conflict handling basics. And again, those of you who've been doing this, you know, the thing I love about this, truthfully, I've been using this for 30 years. And full disclosure, I think you all know Ken's my husband. So we have these overlapping interests of communication and conflict. So he and I actually taught teams courses together at the Naval Postgraduate School a very long time ago. And that's where we started thinking about this idea of teams and conflict, and got some ideas for some of the things that were written about here. So, and just kind of some quick things. Again, those of you who are really experienced, one of the things I always try to really cover is what's the difference between compromising and collaborating. A lot of people get that wrong and don't appreciate the difference, and they are different. And then the collaboration, of course, is one that we know that people just don't have the skill set. And as individuals get more seniors, and definitely working with senior leaders in teams or team leaders, is building those abilities to be collaborative. And so that in and of itself is a whole different skill set. And like I said, I'm going to be spending time with all these leaders from nations next week, really talking about how to build collaborative capacity for issues that they're dealing with. So lots of good stuff here. You know, I just find this, the individual one's great, but when you start working with teams, those of you, again, working with teams, I mean, it just really kind of blows up in complexity and all the really cool things you can do with this. So I'm really jazzed. I do a lot of research around this, and the way organizations are changing today, it just puts a whole new spin on everything. So I just find this super exciting, and I will talk about some of that next week in webinar 3 when we talk about different types of teams. Okay, I want to keep moving for everybody. So, and again, you know, talking about overuse and underuse and best use, as I talked about earlier. So there's lots to talk about, but we really are now focusing on team, right? Not, it's individuals in the team and the dynamics in the team, but how are we working together as a team now is really what's core. I also threw in the facilitator's guide. This is a tool I use. I'm sure this, again, those of you who have been doing this a lot do something like this or have some variation. And I get everyone to participate in what are the advantages and disadvantages of each of the modes. And so, for instance, a good one always comes up is that people who are really high on avoiding think that, oh, wow, that's really a horrible thing. And when the people who may be competing or don't use avoiding at all, who think that's wonderful, they never avoid, once they learn more about what the purpose of avoiding is and how that can actually be useful, because remember, all 5 modes can be useful, it's just when you use them. Some of my highest people who are using competing the most will say, wow, you know, they walk away from class, that's something I need to work on. I can see that's something that is valuable and something I don't have in my repertoire at all. And I really need to be thinking more about that. So really nice way to get people thinking about, and you know, my partner and I, when we work together, his saying is, it's the team that talks about their team process who are the high performing teams. And again, having done this with so many teams do not have these conversations. And one of the ways I really like this and other work I do is I have data now. It's not just people saying, I think this or I think that. We have data, and you're going to have lots of data from here. And that's a great way to start the conversation. It can be a great way of kind of setting a metric. We'll talk in a minute about SMART goals. And you can look at progress like 3, 6, 9 months out. It helps you build a language. I mean, there are so many things you can do with this, which I think is just great. Okay, so this is really helpful. I find that this exercise, again, it's in the facilitator's guide, just serves so many purposes. And it really kind of gets it out there about why these modes are important, why we need diversity on the team. It's good to have all of these things on the team. There's going to be some times when some people will be better leaders, other times when people will need to kind of pull back a little bit on their mode. So it's a really great way. And now they have a conversation to talk to each other about it. So to me, that's really cool. Okay, then, so this is an example of the team profile. Again, if you saw it, if you came to webinar 1, you would have seen this. But it's basically showing you, and so this is where it really starts to get different. The first few pages of the team report look similar to the others where it's got the, what is conflict, etc. So you want to spend time on that. But then you get to the profile. And this first one shows you, this is an example of a team of 7. And you've got one person who's high, a member tendency, but not, a potential overuse, not necessarily, just giving you kind of a yellow or red flag. How many people scored low on that, which would be in the 25th percentile, 0 to 25 percentile. And then collaborating, we have high to, I'm not going to read through all this, but anyway, you start to see the profile. And you're starting to get a sense of, this is kind of interesting. Was this what I expected based on what I heard from the previous interviews? Maybe from if they did the diagnostic tool. So you start to see, to me, it's kind of puzzle. It's interesting to figure all this out. And then while this is really helpful, and I'll keep coming back to this when I'm facilitating, it is a little complex. And so what we did on the next one was we take that same numbers. I might have the team like circle, which ones they see high, what they see low, and have them start telling me, was this a surprise? Like I did this yesterday. I had everyone on the team look at it and say, hey, here's how it turned out. It's just a surprise to anyone. So we can have a conversation around that. Then the table is put into this graph. And it's basically the same thing. It's just shown a different way. And we take the percentages then. So in this case, 57% of the members of this team scored high on accommodating. Nobody scored low. And then high on underuse of compromising. So you start to get a table, and there's a formula. And you'll see this all explained in the facilitator's guide of how we put these in order. So this is going to be the one that's most used, highest. And there is a formula. You'll notice that the accommodating and avoiding have the same 57, 57. So there's a behind the scenes formula that goes on so we know which one. You can tell here it's because 29% are also low use compared to 0. So that one's kind of obvious. And then avoiding, collaborating, competing. And then this bottom one is going to be the largest percentage of people who might be scoring low in that particular mode. So you kind of get a sense of what do the modes look like, what are the relationship between them. So this gives you a good kind of snapshot of what's going on in the team. Okay, then let's see, I'll push through those. This is another one that I find extremely useful, but this was only in the facilitator's report. So what happens is all the team members will get a team report, and all the front section of it is exactly the same for the whole team. And then the back section I'll show you in a minute is their individual report. And just for the facilitator, there's a separate facilitator's report where you will get this, and it shows all the team members' names and their high, medium, and low. The reason we don't include this in the team report for all the members is that we want to really be careful about confidentiality in all of this. if people really want to know or not want their names to be out there or not associated with their profile. So that would be something that the facilitator and the leader would want to negotiate with the team. So real quick, and I know I want to make sure I'm keeping track of my time here, is for this team, just for fun, remember we had one person who was high competing. It turns out for this pretend team I have that that person is the senior member of the team. And the person who is the team leader is the person who was the really high avoiding and high accommodating. And there is a case like this in the facilitator's guide and something I'll talk about at our next webinar. But what's going on in this particular team is that the senior leader is kind of taking over and in fact kind of bullying and pushing out the voice of all the other members, and the team leader's not really doing much about it. And so that becomes evident in the data that there's there, and then in working with the team together to try to make some changes on the team that will allow the other people to participate more. And what it resulted in, because of this dynamic, was kind of a lack of engagement. It was hitting morale. So different, and then obviously they weren't using all of their good ideas as best they possibly could. So this is a sample, and I tell you, I made it up, but there's actually a team I worked with that was similar to this. Okay, then there's, like I just talked about, the individual profile. So each person will get their individual scores, just like you would have seen before. And then it compares your highest mode for that individual as well as your team's. So you know kind of how other people on your team, what the most predominant mode was, how you may be similar or different. So lots of information to talk about. And then each one of the sections, the team section and the individual section, have these challenges and remedies. So you can look at that list of if you're high or if you're low, there's a list of possible challenges and possible remedies that are very behavioral and very specific. So the team facilitator or team members can look through those and check which ones look like they might be an issue and decide which ones they might want to tackle. Okay, and then another possibility, and this is just one of mine, and is actually something I talked about with the team yesterday, is to do a gap analysis, and probably some of you have done this before. So this is based on all the data. Remember I told you how much data you have. You've got the things from the team report. If you do the diagnostic, you've maybe got interviews that you've done with the leader and maybe other people. So you've got data here that you can kind of talk about with the team. You know, they will know this too, is what does their team look like? In this particular team, they had a tendency to overuse and underuse certain things. They had limited skills in collaborating, et cetera, et cetera. And based on a discussion, we talked about what's the desired future state for this team. So maybe it's a year from now. Maybe it's a team that's building. Maybe it's going to be adding a bunch of new members. So we find out what's the current state, and then we say, what would we like to be, whatever time frame you want, maybe a year from now. And they create kind of a vision. You know, we'd like to be self-aware of our approaches to conflict. We want positive team norms, regular discussions. And so from looking at where they are to where they want to be, that becomes your gap analysis. And from that, you can develop SMART goals and do your action planning around that. So again, those of you who've done a lot of this before, you know, you're going to have, usually there's a long laundry list of things to work on. So you want to set priorities based on performance for that team of what's important, and then be able to use that as building blocks as you move forward. So it really becomes a really nice way of organizing kind of a performance plan and a way of skill building along the way. So there are examples of these SMART goals for the team, and there's also individual goals. So the individuals will want to do some maybe personal leadership development, and then the team can develop goals and then use those as touchstones throughout, you know, whatever, 3 months, 6 months to see how they're doing. Okay, so I'm going to move now to the post workshop ideas, and then we will getting close to the Q&A here, so I want to make sure there's time for everybody to talk here. So suggested activities afterwards. Obviously, I think we all do. You want to get feedback from the client, maybe from the senior leader or team member evaluation. So we always, do that. My partner and I, a colleague, when we do this, we're always making sure we get feedback. How did it go? Did we achieve the objectives we were hoping to achieve? That type of thing. And then what I might often do is meet with the client 1 to 3 months after the workshop for a progress check. How's it going? Did you get stuck on anything? Do you need help with the action planning? So those kinds of things could be built into your consulting or client engagement. The other is I often do individual coaching sessions. So it could be a coaching session for the leader. It could be particular members of the team may need some assistance. And again, working with the organization and the leader, there could be coaching sessions that follow afterwards. I've done that frequently. And then also, like I mentioned earlier, opportunity for other kind of training. So we combine this many times with giving and receiving feedback, building collaboration, like I said, negotiation maybe. So I have a whole host of programs that we offer, and we'll pair them depending on the organization and what the needs are. Okay. Let's see, I'm going to go forward here, and then we're going to be able to come back. I think Caitlin's going to jump in for a minute and talk about the upcoming webinar, and then we'll Q&A, and we'll see if we can answer some of these questions that came up.
Yes, thank you. So now is a great time. If you have any questions that you would like us to go through, go ahead and start submitting those. While that's taking place, I'm just going to quickly share. We do have our last webinar in the customer series that we would like to go over. So it is on October 26th. It'll be managing conflict for 3 types of teams. So if you're not already registered for that, make sure you register. And as mentioned before, we will include the link to register in the follow-up emails that will also have the recording in this slide. So if you don't want to take it down right now, we will send that to you in the next few days so you can just register easily that way. Similarly with webinar 1 that took place last week, we will also send that out. I know there was a couple of questions about that. People may not have been able to join or register for that, so I will make sure that that's included as well. So I think now we can move into some questions. We do have a good amount coming through right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull those up.
So I can grab some of these, Caitlin, if you want.
Sure, yeah.
Let's see. So I think the first, I'm not going to go down all of them, but I'll pick some out. Someone asked at the very beginning about a 1.5-hour training session. So I think you could start with what's in the facilitator's guide. That's a 3-hour session, and decide, obviously to me, what's going to be important is you're going to set some goals to start with. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? And then pick and choose out of that facilitator's guide which one of those activities you think might be most useful to reach those goals. So that would be really helpful. And what you might find, I find this all the time, is people get really excited, like maybe 90 minutes, and say, wow, it should have been longer. Can you come back and do another session with us? So maybe on action planning. So there could be a possibility for building in a follow-up session for more in-depth action planning is an idea. The question earlier about additional tools and techniques, there are just all kinds of tools and techniques inside the facilitator's guide. And just using the TKI Team Report, you're going to see lots of, I think, ideas there. And like I said, definitely the challenges and remedies are going to give you lots of ideas. And then if you've got more suggestions of other tools and techniques that you want, start dropping those in, because as we learn more about people's needs, we'll be looking at trying to figure out what else we need to develop over time, right? We'll wait and see what the trends are, and wait for a while to see as people start to use this. Okay. Let's see. And I think I was clear about this does not replace the individual TKI. They are 2 separate products for 2 separate purposes. So teams for the team report, and still individuals or dyads for, or maybe large groups. One way Ralph and I were talking about is really, it has to do with how much the individuals are interacting with each other. If they're interacting with each other a lot, then you may want to do the team. report. And if it's a very large group, you may want to do subgroups in those teams. So I've done that before. So it really depends on what it is you're trying to do. Again, I think a person saying they've been doing their own reports, I don't know about you, but when I did this one yesterday, it went from hours of looking at all the scores and putting them in spreadsheets to hit the button, and there were all of the profiles and everything. So it is, in my mind, it's really fabulous that way. I hope I've mentioned a lot of practical applications for everybody. And I'm going to let Jason or someone at the Myers-Briggs company later can talk about how to use team reports from things you might have submitted earlier. We talked about where's the guide and lack of trust. So I think there's some ideas in there around that, and that can really be something that can be built into the team discussion that you have. Let's see, Caitlin, what else do you see?
Yeah, I got a couple for you. So the first one that has been asked by a couple people is, do you share the facilitator's report with the boss?
Oh, personally, I would not, unless that's something agreed upon. That's something I set up in the beginning. Again, it's maybe all personal preference, but I use this for development purposes. And so unless there's agreement, because a lot of times if it's going to be shared with the boss, not always, but the boss may see this as evaluation. And so then we get stuck on that. Is this going to be used for some kind of you know, I don't know, in a way that wouldn't be conducive to how the report's been designed. So in most cases, I would say no, we are not going to do that. We would talk to the boss. We might talk about ideas, about resources that the team needs. And many times what we find is that there's a lot of leading up that needs to happen. Is the boss isn't aware of the role that the boss of the system might be creating that's creating some of the issues in the team. So it's also a way to give feedback to the boss. We do that a lot of times. So, but no, just take the results and show it to the leader. I would not do that myself.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the next question, how do we help members develop needed skills in areas that they underuse?
Okay, so again, those might be, again, I would set a priority, and if you look at what is the team as a whole, maybe they need to develop, so collaboration, that one's easy, I guess, is how would we help the team develop some skills around collaboration? If that's an underused score, and if you see that that's something that's core to the kind of work that they do, again, I would probably find out a little bit more, and then I would offer maybe some training sessions on building those collaboration scores. Sometimes you may find some people, I'm sure you've seen this before, their individual scores are extremely high on accommodating, avoiding, and they're well aware that they are not assertive. And so there may be some ways of talking about with them and developing ways that they can be a little bit more assertive, either within their team, or I don't know about you, but I usually find out this is usually something that's happening at home, happening with their boss, etc. And so we may talk about that, and I do some one-on-ones with people on things like that. So I hope that helps answer some questions. But I don't know, in my mind, the choices are limitless almost on this. There's so many things you can do. Okay, what else?
Great. Yeah, so the next one, have you ever connected this with the 5 dysfunctions of the team?
I'm reading exactly the same one, Caitlin. Yes. So that's definitely, and I believe in fact, I know he does, he mentions the TKI in the book as a possibility. So that's another one that can be used. So there's, again, so many things that you can pair this with that can be really helpful. And some of it may just depend on you as a facilitator and which tools that you have already developed, and how can you integrate this and build it into your repertoire of things that you offer your clients.
Great.
When you say the Harvard project on negotiation, that's good material too. We've developed a lot of our own. I have a colleague actually that's going with me to Africa. She developed a lot of her own stuff on negotiations, so we use a lot of that material, but I'm familiar with the Harvard Project, and that's good material too.
Perfect. Okay, and then another question that came in a little bit earlier was, why does compromise exist? The two axes derive 4.
Why does compromise exist? So I don't know if you're familiar with the pies of satisfaction. I don't want to give too long of a lesson here, but the pies of satisfaction, if you look along the dimension, right, of competing, compromising, and accommodating, that is the distributive dimension. So it's basically, if you think about resources, that you've got picture a pie, and either someone gets it all, someone gets none, or you're going to split the difference. If you go up the other dimension, from avoiding to compromising to collaborating, that is more the integrative dimension. And interesting enough, Michael, who mentioned the negotiations thing, that's a real core negotiations principle too. And so that middle one, the cut down the middle, is okay, but and again, depends. It's easier, it's faster to say, okay, you take half, I take half. But many times the more effective one is collaboration, is how can we figure out everyone's interests and concerns and come up with a creative, more collaborative approach. So there are many times even the resource itself isn't something that lends itself to an integrative approach, or time-wise or something like that. There's many reasons why compromise might be the choice rather than collaboration. And that some of that material is in the let's see, in the team report, but also there's a booklet on the Myers-Briggs on Intro to Conflict Management, and I'm sure that has the pies and explains the whole pies of satisfaction and those different modes. So there's a lot of background material in that Intro to Conflict book that Ken, my husband, wrote that would be useful if you don't have all that information. So anyway, that was a long-winded answer, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, and there are a few more questions that I just want to run through. So the next one, what if a team has the same mode for highest and lowest scores?
Okay, so that's possible, and we anticipated that. So it is possible that a team scores highest and lowest on the same mode. And so with painstaking work with the whole crew, I've been working with Myers-Briggs people. They are amazing. And all the work that went on behind the scenes on this is that there is a template that's basically used that if the team members score that way, you will get a report that shows that with the profile, and it still has challenges and remedies based on that. So that's a possibility. We built that in, and that will happen with the team. They did multiple, I can't tell you how many tests the Myers-Briggs people did in preparation for this team report, but they've tested it on, hundreds of teams to see if we got every combination of things that might be out there, making sure that the report would come out correctly. So I have a lot of admiration for all the work that went on behind this thing, much more than I ever knew.
Great, good to hear.
And you, Caitlin, you've been great too.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have time for maybe like 2 more questions. So, and I'm not sure if you have specifics for this next one, but do you have any specific materials that you would recommend for people to use developing in the various 5 areas?
Oh, in the 5 areas? Yeah, I mean, again, it really depends on, that's the answer, right? If you're a professor, it always depends what those modes are, and what's, again, knowing the context of the team. And then, yeah, so it's hard to answer what specific one, because I'd really have to know what's the team and what's the context. And I think of it like, maybe this is a good analogy, I think of it as the Mary Poppins bag. I have, and I'm sure those of you who do a lot of facilitation, I have got just about everything in my bag. And so if whatever the situation might be, I have a go-to that I will use for that particular situation, whatever it might be. And I see someone's asking, a couple of people ask if the PowerPoints will be available, and they are. I will look at these after we get done and see if there's anything that I need to add or take out, and those will be posted on the website, right, Caitlin?
Yes, we will be sending out these slides for each of the webinars will be included, among other resources that we will have available as well, like the research, and we also have a psychology of conflict ebook available. So a couple of great things to check out. And
Yep.
For the last question that we will have time for, Gail, when might you want to re-administer a team report?
Oh, okay, great. I'm going to add one thing here. Somebody did say examples to use for developing collaboration skills, assertiveness skills. So if people have those suggestions like that and start dumping those in the question box, those are things we're looking for not just for an individual, but if several people start to ask those questions, it might be an area that we could develop materials. Again, until we know people are using them and that type of thing, etc. So let's see, say again, what was the question, Caitlin? Sorry, I interrupted.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, that's a great shout. We definitely do want to hear from everybody. So the question was, when might you want to re-administer the team?
Oh, right. Yeah. Right. Okay, so what you might want to do is, it depends, because if you've got a new team, you might do it then. And then maybe a lot of new team members come on, so maybe you want to re-administer. It's really going to depend on how many new team members. So is there a big change in the dynamics of the team? And then again, those of you who study teams and work with teams a lot, they have a life cycle. And so there's going to be times when it gets tough and maybe they have difficulties, they're struggling. So that might be a time to come back and re-administer and to think about it if it's been out a little bit, maybe towards the end of the team. So there can be a lot of different ways that a team might be working together that you might want to might consider actually administering the team report again.
Great. Okay, well, I think that's all that we have time for today. So as we mentioned a couple times, we will be sending out this recording and a copy of the slides. And don't forget to register for the third webinar in this series. But outside of that, if there are any other questions that you think of in the next couple days, you can feel free to email us and we will get back to you with an answer. If we didn't get to your question today, we will also get back to you via email with an answer. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and thank you, Gail, for the awesome content.
Yeah, and if anybody has ideas, I'm still in developing the third webinar. It's going to be about new teams, I think Caitlin mentioned, and about struggling teams and about remote or hybrid teams. If you want to drop those ideas in the question box or email anyone, let them know. That would be great, and I'd be happy to do some shaping around that. So let me know. So I am so glad all of you came today. This is really, I hope you can see how much fun this is. I'm really enjoying it and getting to know more about the users and ways that we can make this product as helpful as it possibly can be. So thank you all for coming.
Great. And have a great rest of your day, everyone. We will go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you.